In this module, we will have our first look at a blueprint, the first-person player character blueprint. What logic is already in there, and how can we start to change those values up a bit? You can download the project from the course page, or create a new first-person character template with starter content. I'm currently using Unreal Engine 4.25. But before going into the editor, we will have a look at the most common variables. First, we have the boolean, which is almost always colored red, which will make it easy for you to spot. A boolean can only have two values, either it's true or it's false. Example would be a variable called can sprint. It could be true or it could be false. You can either sprint or you can't. Next we have an integer. This is a whole number, usually colored a more dark green bluish. This can't have any decimal values and it's not a variable that will come across a lot during the course. Next up, we have a float, usually recognizable by a light green color. This is also a number variable, but a float can have a decimal. It's a very common variable which we will actually use a lot as well. And last, we have a vector, recognized by its yellow color. This is a set of three numbers which can be used for a lot of different things. Vectors are also used to indicate actors' position in the world, where X, Y, and Z all represent the dimension in the game world. If you'd like to get a better understanding of more common variables, you can check out the official Unreal Engine documentation. We will now have a look to see if we can recognize some of these variables in our first-person character blueprint. Alright, we are finally in the engine. We're in the Gameplay Designer project, which is basically a first-person template, just cleaned up a little bit and changed around just a little bit. We can press play, we can walk around, we can jump. These light blue cubes can actually move when we shoot at them, so you can shoot with left mouse button. As you can see, it moves. And I'm going to press escape so we can have a look at how this is all set up. Let's look for our first-person character blueprint inside the content browser. Logically, we would go to blueprints and then first-person template, and then we can find it. Another way to do this is to select the asset that you want to go to, select it in the world outliner or in the viewport, and press Ctrl B. That will actually take you directly to the asset in the content browser. Right now this isn't really necessary for us, but as your project gets bigger and there's a lot of different actors, you may want to look them up real quick. You can just press Ctrl B. Let's open it up. Here we are, the first person character. If we check out the event graph, we can see the different input that is set up. We've got our mouse input for turning and looking up and down. We've got our move forward and move right. These also take care of moving backwards and moving left. And we have an input set up for jump, which just calls a function called jump. And we have spawn projectile, which shoots that yellow ball when we press left mouse button and plays a sound. If we go to our viewport, we can see what makes up our first-person player character. We can see the camera, the capsule, the mesh. You can also see those here in the Components tab. You can see our capsule, our arrow component, our mesh, which is currently empty because we added a mesh directly under the camera. And a weapon. Now another thing that we can see over here is called character movement component. This isn't a component that you can see, but it is a component that has a lot of movement logic inside of it. So when we say jump, it actually calls a function inside this component. If we check out the details panel with the character movement selected, we can see a whole lot of different variables that influence our character movements. So we can see gravity scale, max acceleration, break-in friction factor. Now you'll be able to recognize some of these variable types by what we discussed earlier. You can see that these are all floats, they have a decimal number. A little bit further down, we can see some true-false statements. These are all booleans. Alright, let's actually start changing some of these values. Let's take our maximum walk speed. Let's put that on 1000. But we'll also want to change how high our character can jump. Scroll down, we'll see character movement jumping, falling, and we can change the jump C velocity to something like 1000 as well. We have to click compile and save, make sure all the code is compiled, and then we can press play. And now when we walk a lot faster, and when we jump a whole lot higher. That's how easy it is to change some of the movement variables around. You can also do this directly in the level. So by selecting your first person player character, And then in the details panel, you can actually extend this a bit. When we scroll down, we'll see our character movement. With the character movement component selected, we can now tweak the same variables as we were able to tweak before. Keep in mind, this does not save it to the blueprint. So we set this to 200, press play. We are now walking super slowly, but we can still jump incredibly high. Now, we just had our first look at our character blueprint and we changed the maximum movement speed and the jump height. I now encourage you to have a look yourself and see if you understand what a lot of the variables in the character movement components do and what the logic in the event graph does. In the next part, we'll change the maximum movement speed with a new variable that we'll create ourselves, and we'll make sure that it happens on begin play. In this module, we will make it easier to play around with the movement variables we have changed before. We will create our own new variables, and we will initialize them when the game begins. We will comment our code, and we will make sure that they are editable so that we can change them in the level instance as well. In this module, our goal is to override the maximum walk speed and jump height with our own new variables. Let's go into the first person play character. Let's go up a bit. So we want to replace variables that are part of the character movement component. We can actually drag this out into our event graph, and this will create a reference. This reference will allow us to set or get variables from the component. So if we drag off and we look for max walk speed, we can see that we get a get max walk speed or set max walk speed. We'll want to do set max walk speed. This will now override the value of this variable in the component. We want to do the same for the jumping height. So we'll look for set jump c velocity and override that as well. We want that to happen after we've overwritten the max walk speed. What's happening now is that we're setting both of them to 0 in this piece of logic. We're going to create our own variables. I'm going to show two ways of doing this. First way is to go to the My Blueprints tab and then variables and then click the plus here on the variable. We now added a new variable. So let's call it fb underscore max walk speed. FB standing for first person. Press enter. Now if we check out the details panel, we can see that the variable type is actually a boolean. We need this to be a float. So we can click it and there, float. If we want to set a default value, we need to compile first. So we need to compile our code. Let's go ahead and do that. Compile. I always like to save afterwards as well, just to make sure. And now we can set a default value. Let's put that to 500. Compile and save. In this case, there's another way to create a new variable. We're setting the jump c velocity. We can go to that node and right mouse button on the green pin here and say promote to a variable. It now created a new variable, but it also set the variable type automatically, which is nice. We'll call this fb underscore max jump height. Now we need to compile and make sure to set a default value. Let's also do 500. Drag this down a little bit, make it a bit more readable. As you can see, we're still setting our max walk speed to 0, so we need to grab our new variable and connect it. So we can drag it out here and then select get. What you can also do if you want to get a get node is hold Control while dragging out the variable, and it will automatically do a get instead of ask you which one you want. If you hold Alt while dragging out, it will automatically do a set, but we don't need that right now, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this. We want to connect the max walk speed to the max walk speed, and there we go. We are now overriding our maximum walk speed and our jump velocity with our own new variables. But these two nodes are just hovering in the event graph. There's nothing here that's making this happen. But these two variables at the moment are never really called. They're just hovering in the event graph. We want them to happen as soon as the game starts. There's actually an event for that you can always call in any Blueprint actor. It's called begin play. So I'm going to go ahead and press right mouse button and look for begin play. And there we go. Add event, event begin play. We want to connect these two. And there we go. As soon as our game starts, we override the maximum walk speed with our new variable, and we override the jump c velocity with our other new variable. Now we want to comment this code in case another team member wants to look over it, or we come back later and we wanted to make some changes. Let's select everything and press C for comment. And let's call this begin play. You can add some more details, do a description how you like. I'm going to say set movement variables. Now what I like to do with begin play is go into the details panel with the comment selected and go to comment color and set this to blue. Having begin play always be blue makes it really easy for me to find it. Right now if we zoom out, it won't be hard to find begin play. But I don't really like reading, I like to go by color coding. So right now I would be able to immediately spot begin play without having to read, which I like. So we'll go ahead and compile and save, and we'll go back to our map. When we select our first person character, however, we will not have access yet to those variables that we just created. We can't change them in the level instance of our actor. So we'll go right back to the first person character. And we need to make some changes over here. If we go to the My Blueprints tab and we look at our new variables, you can see this icon behind it. And it says variable is not public and will not be editable on an instance of this blueprint. So what we need to do to change this is just click it. And this will open the eye, and this means that it is now public and that we can edit it on an instance of the blueprint. Another way to do this is to click the variable that you want to make editable, and then in the details panel select instance editable. Compile and save. You'll see that the eye icon has changed here as well. Go back to our first person map, and with your first person selected, in the details panel you can now change those values. So now it's a whole lot easier for you to play, change the values, play again, change the values, play again. Something important to keep in mind is that if we do change the values, let's say we'll do 400, 400, you'll see these yellow arrows appear next to it. If we click these, it will reset back to default, which is 500. I'm going to change it to 400 again. So this means that the changes that we make are only applied to the instance that we currently have selected. What this means is if I drag in a new first person character, the values will have reset again. So values that you set on the level instance are not saved to the blueprint. You could look at those values and go back into your first person character blueprint and then change the default value to your new value, but you can also select your first person character and then in the details panel click on edit blueprint and then select apply instance changes to blueprint. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Apply instance changes to blueprint. We updated the blueprint. And now we can see 400 and 400 are the new normal. There's no yellow arrows. And if we go into the blueprint, we can see jump height's 400, max speed is 400. The variables inside the first person player character have updated. You now know how to create a new variable that can be tweaked in a level instance. Next up, we'll have a look at changing our variable while we play. In this module, we will add debug controls that will allow us to change our variables while we play. This will allow us to test a lot of different values for them. We will also need to communicate these values back to ourselves so we know what the current value is. When looking at our first person character, we can see that we already have some input set up. Move forward, move right, jump. These all have associated keys with them. For our debug controls, we don't need something so official. I just want our movement speed to go up when we scroll the mouse wheel up, and I want our movement speed to go down when we scroll the mouse wheel down. We can set up events for that directly in here. So right mouse button and look for mouse wheel up. And we'll do the same for mouse wheel down. Let's reposition these a little bit, move them up, zoom in. When we look at them, we can see pressed and released. In this case, that means scrolling or not scrolling. The next part we know how to do. We can grab our character movement component and we'll set the maximum walk speed. I can copy paste this, but I need to make sure to hook up the character movement components. Make this go into pressed, make this go into pressed. So line them up. What will happen right now is when we scroll up or down is that we'll set the maximum walk speed to 0. We want to change the current value. So in order to change the current value, we need to do get max walk speed. Now that we have the maximum walk speed, we need to change it somehow. So you can drag off of this and look for plus, and you'll get float plus float. Press enter. Let's move these out a little bit. We'll do the same thing again. We'll look for minus float. Position these, I'll move this down. As you can see, it can get a little bit messy. So let's clean it up a little bit. You can double click on a wire to create a reroute node. So I'm going to do that twice. And I'm going to connect this to this one as well. This already looks a lot better. I'm going to move this back. Now we have a plus float and a minus float. Let's change this value to 100. So this is a very big number. So every time we scroll up, it will increase the movement speed with 100. And when we scroll down, we'll also do 100. Connect these, compile and save. Let's press play, see what happens. We'll press play. We can walk around, and as we scroll up, you'll see that the character movement speed is increasing by a lot. Now this will probably not help you find the right value for your movement speed, but it could be fun. Something else you might notice is that it's hard to count the amount of times you move your mouse wheel up. So you really have no clue what the current speed is, so you have no idea what to change it to. Now we can feed back that information to ourselves using a bunch of different methods, but the easiest one would be a print string. Let's go behind the maximum walk speed and let's look for print string. We will connect the two. And right now the print string says hello. You can connect the float right into the print string and it will convert the float to text and it will print it back to us. I'm going to click the down arrow and I'm going to change the duration to 10. So this means it will stay on screen for 10 seconds. Compile, save. Now I'm going to do the same here. Print string. Drag that up, connect the two. Compile and save. So now when we press play and we walk around and we change the movement speed, you can see in the top left that our maximum walk speed is shown to us. It's probably smart to make these values a little bit smaller so you can really tweak it. But yeah, this is just an example showcase. What I like to do here, similar to the begin play, is comment everything, debug, and then describe the debug. The color I like to give it is red. This really makes it jump out, so that if you come back later, you open your blueprint, you're reminded that, oh yeah, I had debug in here, so you don't ship with the debug still enabled and have your players be able to change the maximum walk speed with a scroll wheel. We just had a look at adding debug controls and using these controls to change our variables while we were playing. Before going to the next video, maybe have a look if you can debug some other variables while tweaking them. Get your character feeling just right. In the next module, we'll add sprinting. In this module, we'll add sprinting functionality to our player character. We will add input for this to our project settings, and we will update our character movement speed for when this input is pressed and for when it's released. In our first-person player character, we have our input action jump. We want to make something just like that, but then for sprinting. Let's go back to our first-person example map, go to Settings at the top, and then click Project Settings. Here we'll have to go to Engine, and then Input, and there we'll see this. All the way at the top, we see bindings. We see action mappings and axis mappings. We want to open action mappings. Here we'll see jump and fire, reset VR. We'll add a new one. Now we are able to name our new action. Call this sprint. Now we are able to associate keys with this action. I will choose for left shift. If you want to add more, you can add this plus sign and add as many bindings as you want. I'm going to remove this action mapping. And now when we go back to our first person character, you can now find the action event for sprint. Press enter. And there we go. The next part will be very familiar to us. We need to update our character movement speed. So drag it out. Drag out from here. Look for set max walk speed. copy paste it, connect, and make sure that when we press it, we update it, and when we release it, we update it again. Let's make sure that we have a variable for the max sprint speed. I'm actually going to duplicate the FP max walk speed, so select it and then Ctrl W to duplicate it. Call it FP max sprint speed. Compile, and we can now give it a value. It also took the value from the max walk speed because we duplicated it. I'm going to set that to 800. Compile and save. All right, let's drag it in, max walk speed, get, connect it to when we release. Let's get the sprint speed, hold Control to get it, connect that to when we press it. So now when we press Shift or any other binding that you set up, it will set the max sprint speed as our new max walk speed. And when we release it, it will set our default max walk speed as the max walk speed. Compile, save. We can actually play, walk around, pretty slow. When pressing Shift, you'll see you'll start running. Okay, that's great. It might be a good idea to keep track of the fact if we are sprinting or not. So we'll want to create a new variable for that. And this is going to be a boolean. So I'm going to click the plus variable and it will create a boolean for us. And we'll call this is sprinting. Compile, save. Default is false because by default we are not sprinting. We don't need to make this editable because we don't need to change this for the level instance. But we can drag this out. Hold Alt while dragging it out so we can set it. So instead of holding Alt, you can also drag it out and then say set is sprinting. And we'll connect these up. So when we press, are we sprinting? Yes. When we let go, are we sprinting? No. We might need this in the future. Let's go ahead and select everything. Press C to comment it, and we'll call this sprinting. Reposition that. Okay. Compile, save. Our character can now sprint. In the next module, we will allow him to crouch as well. In this module, we will be adding the logic for crouching to our first-person player character. We will repeat some steps from the previous module and do some new things. For example, in this module we will start using a timeline, which will allow us to gradually change a variable over a set period of time. In order to add crouching, we need to repeat some steps of the last module. So we'll go to Settings, Project Settings, Engine, Input, and we now need to add a new action mapping for crouch. So I'm going to go ahead and call this crouch, and I'm going to add one more action. The first one, I'll look for C. Just look for the C on the keyboard. There we go. For the second one, we'll look for Control. I'm going to go with left Control. So now we can either press C or left Control in order to execute the event crouch. Let's go back to our first person character. We can now right mouse button and look for crouch. Compile and save. Now what we could do is call an event called crouch, which is similar to jump. There's already crouch settings on the character movement component, but that crouching snaps and we want to have a smooth crouch, so you'll go down smoothly, and we want to do it ourselves. So we won't be using that method, we'll be doing it ourselves. A lot of this is also similar to what we want for the maximum walk speed. So we can actually go ahead and copy some of this. Copy these 4 nodes. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. So when we press, we update our maximum walk speed. When we release, we update our maximum walk speed. We want to create a new variable for maximum crouch speed. So we can, again, Ctrl W, max sprint speed, and we'll just call it max crouch speed. Compile and save. Let's put that to 200, which is half of our current default. Drag that out, get, connect it to the max walk speed, compile, save. And now when we press play, we can walk around, and when we press C, you'll see that he'll slow down. This is not really crouch. We're not really moving up or down. And we want to add a smooth motion of going up and down. So what do we need to do in order to achieve this? Let's go to our viewport and have a look. So we have our camera. What if we move that down? Well, the nice thing about the first person character template is that everything is attached to the camera. So if we move down the camera, Control Z, you can see that everything below it moves with it. So basically we need to update the relative location of the first person camera. So right now we can see it's 64 and we want to move that down and then back up again. And in order to get a smooth motion, we'll use something that's called a timeline. So right mouse button, add timeline, enter, and there we go. We will name this timeline T_crouching. Move it up a little bit. And as you can see, there's a lot of different inputs here. There's play, play from start, stop, reverse, reverse from end. Sometimes it's best to call play from start. Sometimes it's best to call play. In this case, we will want to say play when we press it. And then when we release it, we can reverse it. This way, you can get a smooth motion when you're still in the process of crouching, but already want to stop crouching again. Let's actually open this up because we can go inside of it. Just double click it. And now we are inside the timeline and we can define it. So at the top here, we see a bunch of buttons and then we see length. How long should it take for us to crouch down? I think 0.5 seconds is a decent amount of time. Just press enter. So we want to gradually go from value 1 to value 2. What we can use for that is a float track. So click the float track button and name it crouch alpha. An alpha is usually a value that goes from 0 to 1. Either it's completely transparent or it's completely visible. A lot of times you'll go from 0 to 1. So that's what we'll do here as well. When the time is 0, we want the value to be 0. Let's add some values. Right mouse button, add key. So when we are starting, we want the default value to be there. Then after 0.5 seconds, we want the value to be at 1. We want the crouch to be completed. So right mouse button, add key to curve float, time 0.5, value 1. And here you can see a straight line going from 0 to 1. We can smooth this out a little bit. Just select both points, right mouse button, and then change the key interpolation to user. This will make it a bit smoother. This is usually always the better option. It feels better, looks better. File save. Now when we go back to the event graph, you'll see that a new output has appeared, our crouch alpha. We want to use this alpha to update the position of our first person camera. So let's grab a reference to our first person camera. On the output pin of this, we can now say set relative location. And then we drag out the update into the set relative location. What this means that for the duration of 0.5 seconds, this will constantly update the relative location of our first person camera. Now we need to lerp between two values. We'll go from value 1 to value 2. We can actually do that by dragging off of the new location and look for lerp. And there we'll see lerp vector. Press enter. I'm going to drag this out a little bit further. I'm going to correct this and connect our crouch alpha to the alpha. Now we need to know the values. Only our Z value is changing because we're going down. So let's have a look at our Z value. Click our first person camera. 64. You can actually copy, paste. Let's go down to 30. We need to make sure that our X and Y values are the same as well. So we could just copy, paste, copy, paste, copy the Y value as well. So over the course of 0.5 seconds, we will now go from our default position to our crouch position. When we press play, when we press C, you can see our character moves down. It's not that much yet. Maybe we can even put this lower. Let's put it on 0. Compile, save, play, crouch, and now we can see he really goes down. And because we did play and reverse and not play from start, we can stop crouching as we're crouching, and it's always smooth. Always a smooth motion. Now, if you want this to happen faster, you can always update the timeline. An important thing to keep in mind right now is that we updated the location of our first person camera. We did not update the capsule component. So our crouching at the moment does not allow us to walk under obstacles because our capsule component is still as big. And we can use the same event to update our capsule half height. So in the event graph, you can get the capsule component and then do set capsule half height. We can lerp this as well. Use the same alpha. And then go from the default value of 96 to 50. Now this will also have an influence on the camera because this shrinks, so it goes further towards the middle, so our camera will also go lower. Compile, save, play. We crouch, now we go super low. This is almost prone. Now that we have set the capsule half height, we don't really need the first person camera anymore, but it was interesting to have a look at. So we'll delete this, we'll connect the update to the capsule component, clean this up a little bit, and now we need to make sure that we can check if we are crouching or not. So we can select is sprinting, Ctrl W to duplicate, and rename it to is crouching. Let's drag this out a little bit and set is crouching. So Alt drag. When we are crouching, this needs to be true. When we stop, this needs to be false. Connect it to here, connect it to there. Connect this, connect that. But now, let's have a look when we play. We can crouch, but as we're crouching, we can enable sprinting. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. Let's escape out of there. And let's add a custom event. Add custom event. And we'll call this stop crouching. Now this is an event that we can also call in our blueprint. We can use this to stop our crouching without updating our maximum walk speed. So let's connect this up to is crouching, set that to false. This will reverse capsule half height. Let's move over to sprinting. Let's extend this a bit. Let's actually select everything of crouch, comment it, crouching. Move this whole thing up. The comment also allows you to move everything at once inside the comment box, which is really nice in this case because we need to add some logic to sprinting. Let's go back to sprinting, extend this a little bit, extend this all. Move this over, and we will add a branch. So you can look for branch. Because branch is one of those nodes that you use a lot, you can also hold B on your keyboard and click, and it will just spawn a branch for you. So when we press Shift, we'll need to do a check. When we release Shift, we'll need to do a check as well. So when we want to sprint, we want to have a look, are we crouching? So we can check the condition here and we can connect is crouching. Hold Control, drag it out. If we are crouching, we need to stop crouching. The event we just made. Drag this out even further, make sure it all fits. We need to make sure to stop crouching. If we are not crouching, we can just continue as we normally would. And we also want to check is crouching when we stop pressing Shift, because if we are crouching, we don't need anything to happen. But we can just false. Only if we are not crouching do we want to update the movement speed. Let's have a look. Now we can press play. We can sprint. We can crouch. And when we start sprinting again, we will uncrouch. And you can notice that it starts to get a little bit complicated. Because now when we stop crouching while we're sprinting, it will still update our maximum movement speed. So we'll need to add another branch in our crouch. And when we stop crouching with the input, that only needs to happen if sprinting is false. Now, one more thing we need to do here is on is crouching. If this is true, we still need to set is sprinting to false. That should cover all the special cases. So we run, we crouch, we start running again, it stops us from crouching, we let go of crouching, we're still going. Crouching again, running again. So this is something important to keep in mind. The more input actions you add, the more complicated your code becomes. The more of the same nodes you call, the more you have to keep in mind all those locations where you call those nodes. For example, in this case, we have the maximum walk speed. We're calling that node in a lot of different places. So we need to make sure that they don't interfere with each other. We just added our first timeline to gradually change variables on our player character. In the next module, we will add a health variable. In this module, we will set up a health variable for our player character. We will also set up debug controls to inflict damage to ourselves and eventually restart the level once our health reaches 0. We are about to wrap up our work in the first-person player character, but the last thing we want to do, because we want to use it later on, is create some debug health. Health, as you'd expect, will make a float variable. I'll go ahead and click new variable, call this health, and set the variable type to float. Compile and save. We don't really need this to be editable. We're mostly just going to use this to show off some other features. So I'm going to set it to 100. And now we would like to add some logic to subtract health, and then when our health reaches 0, we'll restart the level. So we'll do that under debug. So I'm going to change this comment a little bit and just call it debug. Make it bigger and add an input action for pressing P. I think P is a good key for taking damage. P keyword, and then we see it. There we go. This is nothing that we haven't done before, so we can get the health. We can look for minus float, it's there right away. Select it. Let's subtract 10 health every time we press P. Change this to 10. And then set health again. Alt drag or drag and then set. Let's connect these two. So now we're updating the health. Now we need to check if our health is 0 or lower than 0. Because in a game there are instances where your health could be minus 100 if you take a big chunk of damage and you still want your character to die in that case. So we'll drag off of this and look for smaller or equal than. And that returns us with a bool. So true or false. So we need to branch. So I'm going to hold B and left click to add a branch. Connect this all up. And then if this is true, we want to restart the level. And we can do this, and because it's debug, we'll just do this with a console command. So you can do execute console command, and there we go, there it is. Press enter. And then inside of there, we want to type restart level. Compile and save. Now when we press play, we can move our character around, we can press P, and when we press it 10 times, it will restart the level. So let me just walk into this corner, press P, there we go, it restarts. So we have our health variable, it updates, it restarts. That's nice. The last thing we'll do in here is to clean things up a little bit. We'll put all our variables in their category. So we have the movement variables. Let's call this category movement. So now we have a new category here under my blueprints. It's called movement. We just created that by filling in the category tab here, and we can just start dragging up variables into that movement. We can do sprinting and crouch as well. Maybe I'm going to. I like to have it a bit organized, so this is good. We'll keep health in here for now since it's a debug variable. Compile and save. Our character can now sprint, crouch, has health, and can receive damage. In the next section, we will have a look at adding info to the player screen and how to set up a post-process volume.